Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
And broke them out into three categories, which, like all non-physical categories, are soft-edged and have less ontological coherence than we might like. But they're social science questions, design questions, and framing questions. There's a lot of overlap. But what we want to do is go through the questions, essentially show you all in aggregate what's come in individually. And what we'd like to get back are either strong reactions to the question, that makes me think of X, here's the follow-on question. 2, I know someone working on that, or there is this that you might want to look at, or a data set that you might want to look at. Or 3, ideally, I am working on the answer to that question. And that we'll go through, and we've tried to order them in such a way that at the beginning of each section, the questions are going to be the most stimulating. At some point, we're going to roll through them because we presumably won't be able to get through all of what came in. Then we'll have to work with Liz to find some place to do the text dump of both the questions that came in. And can we capture somehow what comes? I guess we've got it on the video.
Or somebody could take notes into the.
That'd be ideal.
Perfect.
That would be ideal. Great.
So feel free.
All right.
Fantastic. So the idea is, once we start asking these questions, feel free to.
Oops.
Feel free to shout out or raise your hands. Either way, because the idea is to get this much more interactive. And so we'll start with the social science questions. How can we measure the success of different types of online communities and their survival and productivity against various criteria? Any thoughts?
Why should we do that?
Okay.
Oh. Yeah. I got to get my power supply so it doesn't blank. Mary, can you get me my power supply? Oh.
She feel free to shout out why I fix computer.
Thanks very much. What was your question?
Why should we measure the survival, productivity, efficiency, and online communities?
And do you have an answer to that follow-on question?
I would suggest that one of the best things academia can do is ask why. Like, it seems like I've seen a weird thing in the room, which is a lot of people are like, games are really great, communities are really great, they might be helpful in work environments, but it deeply need to rationalize the fact that they're already something we do and like, and I would question why we need to just make that justification in economic terms, in particular why we want to justify a community in terms of productivity.
Can I respond to that? That's actually my question. The core bits of this one are success, survival, and productivity. It's got a 3-section separate bits. What I was really asking is, given that we have a proliferation of different types of community software, what would be really useful is to know which ones are more successful in which environments, in order that we can proliferate models and specialize and employ the various places. So what I really want to know, for example, one of the things that everyone knows, fascinated by is message boards. So there's lots of different types of message boards. I'd be really interested to know, in what contexts and in what ways which models of message boards work better, so that we can make new ones.
So Mark, is someone working on this? Do you have a comment on it?
Yeah, well, I mean, the other answer is because they cost money.
Okay.
So you want to know your rate of return on investments, and infrastructures cost money, and different infrastructures perform differently. And the answer would be yes. Well, Paul Resnick is doing this because he's measuring different kinds of incentive structures and the effect it has on productivity, and we're doing it in our group by measuring things like message boards and news groups.
So another question. What are the boundary conditions for mobile and pervasive social computing systems? To what extent, in what ways, at what rate, timescale will mobile and or pervasive systems change the way humans interact socially? Thoughts?
Negative 3 years.
Already happened.
Okay. Would you like to clarify?
It already is changing how we interact. And I think that these technologies are also developing in tandem with our interactions. One of the things that's exciting about the mobile and embedded technology space is that the form factors are us. In the thing like discussion we had earlier, we were talking talking about being able to trace the material history of something, of an object, that ultimately the object's aura is all the information that you can see. The fact is that it just makes that visible in different ways. The object always had that aura, the object always had that history. What these layers of technology do is they make it begin to become apparent in different ways or interactive in different ways.
There is a lot of work going on in terms of social consequences of mobile communication. There's sort of a parallel universe of mobile communication researchers that runs around the world that, among other things, will be meeting before the ICA in Germany. So there is a lot of work, and if anybody needs any links, let me know. I can afford quite a few.
Fantastic. So do natives of social media systems have a different notion of themselves as individuals and about their relation to broader social groups?
People who are natively good at it, people who either grew up in an environment where these things are the norm rather than adopting them later. It's the kids today are so good at multitasking argument. How do you test that? How do you support that? What do we know about that?
We just did an experiment in our lab doing the adult Stroop effect test, you know, where the names of the colors are in different colors. And so we did find actually that if we select the high media users, they don't have the Stroop problems that other people do, so they can respond much faster. So we're working on this problem and on horizontal media users and why they might be better at selecting or disregarding certain irrelevant information.
Great.
Can you add a link to that in the back chat? That works great.
Arena.
And I think actually we have a lot of examples of exactly that process, not for media, but for immigration, where people come to a country and the first generation is essentially native, and they change, have different notions of themselves as individuals, and they relate to social groups differently. I actually think that we're seeing a very similar process. That frames of reference that we as technology adopters use are very much embedded in our social context of before technology, whereas the frames of reference that the teenagers who grow up with this use are ones that are very much embedded in a system where technology has always been there.
So since this question I think takes that hypothesis for granted, what work can we point to that helps answer that question?
There's actually a pretty large amount of literature both on immigration and on first generation of agitation. And you can look at it, there's a lot of it in sociology.
No, I meant the second half of your thesis, which is that we can extrapolate from the experience of immigrants into the experience of teens. Is there any work that lays that, bridges those two, or lays that hypothesis out in an observable way?
Working on it. All right. Any other comments?
There's some work by Alex Taylor, and looking at teen use of
Sonia Livingstone.
I don't know if there are any direct comparisons, but on top of my mind, there's certainly a lot of use of teen use which look very different.
Just what is going on with the kids who are heavy technology users? All right. I think we're going to keep going. What are the mechanisms that cause people to act, mark up, buy, or sell bits they care about online? What tips people to try something? What's enough to bring value? Who's working on this kind of problems? Snarky, snarky. Commentary?
One little thing that I'm working on is you find that a lot of this online commerce is only possible in places that have credit models. So I think there's an interesting thing that we can do as an industry is say, how do we enable more credit models, basically to sets of users who've never had them before and let those things be built up, and just enable digital cash, period. It is a major impediment to the developing economies around the world that these systems, these digital systems of cash, do not exist. So we're working on that a little bit. That's it. I'm sorry.
Anyone else?
Fernanda and I were talking at the break about the difference between the sort of classic framing of motivation to blog in the sort of public sense is I am writing because I want a lot of readers, I want an audience, I want to be famous. That does not translate as a motivation to I am spell checking Wikipedia because I want to be famous, or I am rearranging paragraphs in Wikipedia.
So there's a different set of motivations for editing and supportive environments than for production and looking for production of media. And I think Wikipedia is a really interesting place. The motivation of the people doing the heavy admin lifting that Fernando was pointing to this morning are going to be different than the motivations of the people writing the articles. And that would be a really interesting site of understanding the motivational differences even among Wikipedia participants.
And so another name that's working on this type of stuff is Cameron Marlowe, who's actually at Yahoo Research. I don't know. Cool. Does the regular public want to connect with people they do not know outside of the context of dating? Do any of you folks working on dating have thoughts on this?
Howard is working on dating.
Well, obvious examples are if you have something to buy or sell, or if you have a disease, there's something that you are particularly strongly interested in, and your next door neighbor is not necessarily going to be a big source of it. I think that's probably the main reason most people who connect with online groups originally connect.
Sure.
A lot of the work on reties and very well read, why do people online express?
Cool. Jenny?
I've been working for a while on how people in online health support communities interact, particularly looking at the kind of composition of those messages. Like you're comparing how people react and interact online on the health support communities with how they interact face to face, and take models like the ones of Bales and Benny Sheets on interaction. You find that broadly you've got the same kind of breakdown in that you've got like 2/3 usually of the exchange tends to be factual, asking questions, exchanging information, and about 1/3 tends to be empathic and support communication.
Judith?
Oh, I mean, there's sort of a very long tradition of bulletin boards and things like Usenet, but then I think we also want to think about different types of connection. And we also live in an era, sort of the Andy Warhol era of the 15 minutes of fame. It's like great democratization of the pursuit of celebrity that runs from, American Idol to all kinds of reality TV to essentially some of the motivation for MySpace profiles and other social networking sites is that people and also the way that people get dressed up to go and sit in a cafe, that people have a very intense regard for the way they are viewed by strangers, and that is very strongly played out throughout our society.
Okay.
I haven't followed it the last year, but there was the meetup phenomenon that we heard about 2 years ago here, and that certainly showed time was very heavy.
Interesting data point on Meetup. Number one Meetup group right now, most users, most active in most cities, is stay-at-home moms, who were typically the bedrock source of social capital in traditional, physically denser neighborhoods, and are now turning to technology to recreate the social capital of the neighborhood in suburbanized dual income, the dual income norm in the U.S.
So actually, adding to Judith's comment about being dependent on the medium. So I edit distribution list for ACM, Special Interest Group on Information Retrieval, and there are 1,500 people on the list. And I keep asking questions once in a while about what they want to do. One of the things that people on the list explicitly told me was that they don't want discussion. They just want me to beam information at them. And so I listen to everything, and once in a while if I decide it's good for them, I send it to them. And I also have a blog where I copy some of these postings, and I disable trap tracks, disable comments there. Partly because I'm getting spam, partly because people don't want that chatter. They just want to speak at them. It's kind of hard, but I'm just the moderator.
How big is that group?
1,500 people.
Right, yeah. The scale.
And the funny thing is, a lot of the people know each other from going to the conferences. So.
Oh, wait. What level of visual representation of the body is necessary to trigger mirror neurons?
This came up yesterday. This is mine. This came up yesterday in the conversation about training value of massively multiplayer worlds. And it was the experiment where someone was working on rhesus monkeys and was watching the parts of the brain that were lighting up. The monkey was doing certain motor tasks. And then when the monkey observed the researcher doing those tests, the same areas lit up. And it's a way that we learn by watching. And what I'm wondering is, how accurate does the representation of the body need to be to trigger mirror neurons? Because if the answer is not terribly, then MMOs are a really good environment for that kind of learning. Yeah, Howard?
I think there's a more than tangential connection to Reeves and Nash's work on the media equation, in which they reduced the human representation in classic social psychology experiments and found that, contrary to what they reported, most subjects treated the representations, even if they were cartoon-like, the same way that they would treat humans. I think Scott McCloud does a great job explaining that with just the two dots and a slash for a face having an effect in a comic medium.
Julian?
Is there no research that's looked at whether for humans the textual representation of the body would be any different than the visual?
Yeah, the text is not enough. Text obviously is a source of learning, but it doesn't light up those patterns. Reading about people dancing doesn't make you want to dance. Watching people dance makes you want to dance. And there's something about that trigger that is visual, and it would be interesting to see,
Does it depend on if you're a dancer?
I'm not, and it makes me want to dance. So I'm gonna hypothesize from an N of 1 that no. The triggering isn't about training. How good you are at it, obviously, is about training. Yeah, Tom.
I think there's Byron Reeves did a thing last year at Supernova, and he talked about measuring arousal with CAT scans of various things when people play games.
Oh, that's interesting.
Various things were, people who got to choose their own avatar, considerably more arousal, third-person perspective rather than first-person perspective, considerably more arousal and engagement. And I think there was something about levels of detail on the form in MMORPGs that meant there was a significant shift between a more abstracted and a realistic form. So I recommend them.
And did you put that in the background?
I can do.
Thank you.
I'll just add, sorry, that I'm their student, so if you want to have a conversation about different mediums, and there might be gender differences also with
Right.
text and visual things, if you want to have a conversation about that.
Are the online community members of tomorrow going to be more or less participatory than today, and why?
Can we define participatory?
We can.
What kind of contribution are we talking about? We've been talking about a lot of different types.
You know what? I should say this. This came in on the headline of Lurker. So I think the notion is essentially invisible reading is not participation in this framing.
Right. Because as StartRun, there's a way to participate, for instance, in World of Warcraft that might be passive. There's a way to participate in Manifest where you suck up the info and give nothing back. And so I think in different contexts, participation means different things.
Call it contributory then.
So the other thing, what immediately comes to my mind is the work of Henry Jenkins. For those who aren't familiar with him, he has a new book coming out this summer called Cultural Convergence, and pulling out of a lot of things that involve Desserteau and the like. It's like what happens when consumption and production start to collide. And I think that one of the things that's being marked by different researchers is that collision is happening because of the ease of engagement. And so it's sort of an interesting way to get at participation. What does it mean to be doing participation and lurking when you're doing consumption? It is the process of consumption, also production.
I think that as more and more people have access to the internet, online and offline, I think more and more merging. And so, by in an online community, it often means that online community is also offline. And so, I think that consumption of information that happens in these online communities, like the dailiness, makes it so that when you're engaging with people face to face, you're able to be more up to date with them, and so that it is more participatory to registration.
Do you want me to keep going? What impact do computer video games have on the everyday habits and routines of the gamers?
They gather at 4 in the afternoon to make sure that they can all do the raid together.
Does anybody know of anybody studying this stuff?
There was an amazing moment last night on the boat where Dan Hunter appeared and came up to Liz, A, to kiss the ring for the festival, and then, oh, by the way, can we get back into that room that has the really good Wi-Fi connection when we get back to the hotel? And it's just like that kind of sort of framing a social event. Like, look, a whole bunch of us want to go, but we've got to go where there's a good bandwidth.
So Dimitri was talking about this yesterday, but he left early. But he actually was saying that as people play games, the TV watching decreased, and that in terms of their contacts, like the first three closest contacts, it has stayed the same, but the second three grew further apart. So I think
contacts?
several close friends. So he's actually written papers on this. So another resource to look at.
Nikki has very good survey data, nikki.com, on all of that stuff.
The Daedalus project, yeah.
And this isn't core to what I'm doing at all, but there's certainly been a tangent in my work around specific contexts in which people play. So physical spaces, who they're playing with, different kinds of relations in Asian countries, for instance, versus in the U.S., all of that sort of stuff.
Sort of a parallel question that I've had. It's too late to add new questions, but what is the career of a gamer? How do they start? How do they, how does it flourish? How does it end? How does it change and shift along the way?
You can interview Joey afterwards. Irina, did you?
Oh, I just wanted to say that at CMU, Fleming Stage Project Massive is a quite
So we run a group called Games Learning and Society. There's about 6 researchers. We all look at issues around cognition and learning in games. So looking at things like the trajectory of a game career, if you want to call it that. What is it? What is that? Et cetera. And that's at University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Cool, thank you. Is society becoming more individualized?
That's a small question.
Yeah. How can we use... How can we use the computational ability of our machines to transform communication? Intelligent, personal, social agents, behavioral, email, etc. Sorry, heart attack. Anyway. How can we get, and this is sort of a practical question, how can we get access to behavioral server logs and an attitudinal data, survey data from large-scale world?
Didn't get
Did you have a response to it?
That's a large topic of research, but probably not about this group.
Okay. Do you have any references that are useful to people? Okay.
Send me some, and I will post them.
Yes?
Well, Nick, I know, has a lot to say about this. But from my perspective, I'm actually doing a large survey with NCSOC that I'm launching this week that has been sort of a culmination of several months of political and negotiating and relationship building, but has resulted in them agreeing to promote the survey on the launch screen of the game for me as like an academic endeavor. But what I've agreed to do is not to share the quantitative data with the world explicitly, but for me to just use the qualitative data, perhaps contextualize it slightly, but allow them that feeling of control over those specific large pieces of data that they think are a significant part of their IP.
Pained by that idea.
After that phase?
I'm getting a paper of huge amounts, terabytes of data. I'd be happy to talk to anybody about how we can do this. I've had requests for data that violate privacy policies that want 15 terabytes of data sent over, next week. So I think there's a way to do this. I think it would be enormously beneficial. But we need to come to some sort of agreement as to what's really needed.
One hypothesis that's worked for very large software companies. And I've had access to all of MSMP data, and wallet data, and all that. There are several papers and published.
we are publishing the NetScan Data Archive for license to universities and researchers for commercial use. So part of the answer is for those who have large data sets, we're happy to give it to you.
This may be there may be some opportunity to create some standardized data sets for the whole community that would be anonymized appropriately.
That would be real interesting.
That'd be great. All right.
Okay, I'm going to switch the protocol a little bit. I'm not going to read these out loud. I can read it. Any takers?
The visual presence of other people listening to the media.
What's the matter?
Can you read it out loud for multicast, actually?
Oh, sorry.
What elements?
So much of that experiment I get. What elements of MMOG can be adapted to web applications?
I think there's some pages that like gangs.
Did you?
Visual presence of other people looking at the same.
You know, it's funny that third voice IBs. There's been so much work on that, and none of it has. But so the interesting thing is, after the .com flame out, whole bunches of ideas tanked, but we don't know if they tanked because of the nuclear winter or because they were a bad idea. So
no, they're all still there. They're all back in numerous other incantations, and they're not any more interesting than they were then.
Well, but so
Randy feels.
yeah, right. But they're obviously interesting to some. They're obviously interesting to someone because the idea keeps coming up, and like 6 Degrees and Friendster or Backflip and Delicious. Is there something? I mean, this is one of the questions that obsess me. Is there something knowing that other people are reading the page? I mean, my intuition. I've actually seen a couple of students build around this. Is you don't start with global. You start with your group, on the assumption that you run it more like a raid. To take the previous question, or to take this question another way, you run it more like a raid than like global attention. But that is one of the interesting things. All right. How we build virtual worlds or spaces where we operate parallel servers with slightly variable rule sets. Obviously do this in order to change one experimental condition and observe a response by the inhabitant. Is there a natural experiment going on there with shards? Yeah, Julian.
How can we do it? They do it already.
I think the question is then, how do we get access to that data? Because
that was my question. The problem is not so much getting access to the data, because presumably you just need $10 million and you build it yourself. So, anyone who's got $10 million, great.
Talk to Shelley.
Just let me know, and we'll happily take it off your hands. But the problem actually is more difficult because you have to attract people to your world, right? I mean, you have some ethical issues that have to go through IRB about informed consent and so forth, where you're actually, changing rule sets or you're monkeying around with initial states. But we can deal with that. But the problem is assuming that we can get $10 million, how do you ensure that you can build a community that people actually want to come to so that you can experiment in this particular way? Because if you can experiment in this way, then you can generate some really amazingly robust results that you can't otherwise do.
I would argue that if you have the $10 million and you could make that world, you would suddenly care less. And so the way that I would look at it is, what value are you going to give to the community builder that they want to go to the trouble of anonymizing the data and sharing proprietary knowledge?
No, it's not about anonymizing the data at all, right? I mean, we want to have two servers, right? You log into Realm A and Realm B. Realm A and Realm B are exactly the same in every material respect, except for in Realm A, you don't have a dispute resolution mechanism. In Realm, or you have another one where they're exactly the same, except in Realm A, you're allowed to engage in PvP, and in Realm B, you're not. I mean, that's the only experimental condition that we can actually work with at the moment, so we can get that, but big deal. It's not an interesting result. Yeah, some people like PvP. Wow, great. So what we're actually interested in doing is how, if you can get $10 million, because we think we can get $10 million to build this, how do you actually get people to come? Those of you who know how to build communities.
If you knew how to guarantee that you had a good game with money as the only input, again, your principal concern would be as a game designer rather than.
You could flip it on its head and ask what kinds of incentives could be offered or could even be in a sense described to commercial operators of virtual worlds that might induce them to think that running many parallel servers with slight variations is actually worth their while. And arguably, it's worth their while just in terms of their understanding of the form that they work with. If they understood what leads to a good outcome and happy players better than they do, they'd be better off.
Julie.
Or you could flip it around another way and say, why is it so uninteresting to look at the question of how people behave on PvP versus non-PvP? Do a few interesting looks at that, and then take the results from that and say, look what we did with how you already vary the rule sets between PvP and non-PvP. How about if we tried this on the other?
Right. So take the natural experiments to show them the value of knowing the new stuff. Yeah. What are the barriers to contributing to social group interaction, social bookmarking wikis, et cetera, and what are the steps to mitigate those barriers? Sorry. What's that?
What? Oh, I'm sorry. I was being snarky. I said, isn't the problem that there aren't any barriers?
Well, right. So there's at least one set of UI barriers. There's another set to Tom's point about motivation and so forth. Yeah.
I'm going on Esperanto. Thinking of communities of practice, like notion of like making really being comfortable making really peripheral contributions that you know will screw things up, and then getting to successively like make bigger contributions, like designing to invite and reassure people that that progression does exist would be helpful. Because I know I'm kind of scared to edit things sometimes if people don't make it clear that it's not the mission.
How do we make memories portable? I'm sorry, Sean. Were you going to ask?
Yeah. I was just saying generally like this is a very advanced user population that really understands social technology. That I think there's a lot of language or assumptions that are made often. Like this is just a good example of that. The average user still doesn't get it. The language and the idea of aggregating across people your tags. I don't even understand aggregation and across people of tags. So I actually think that like y'all did a good job of really making it understandable for the average person. They use the complex processes.
Or maybe the metaphorical model almost more than the UI. What is it you're doing when you're here, however good or bad the design is? How do we make memories portable? Anybody got a quick answer? Irene, do you want to expand on this a little bit?
Sure. This is my question, and there's been a lot of work trying to annotate objects, and objects in general in our lives contain memories. And I just got back from New Orleans, and I did a lot of field work there. And the one thing that came up is when you leave, you can't take memories with you because they're objects and they're too big, too bulky. When you come back, they're not there anymore. And it's those objects that's the hardest thing to lose. So can we make them portable?
Or maybe the question is, can you make them tangible? And so it's not just portable in objects, but memories, making memories tangible in some way so they can become portable, because there is memory. I carry it with me all the time. I have lots of them there in my head. But I can exchange and share them if they're tangible.
Well, your memories can be contained in, love letters you got 10 years ago, or in pictures you have on the fridge. They may not be ones that will come to the front of your mind. Those things trigger memories. These are triggers. So maybe the question is, how do we make those triggers portable? How do we make them so that at least something can be retained and quickly taken with you?
Okay, I'm going to go through the rest relatively quickly. So I'm just going to put these up, and if you have something immediately urgent, just get through this. So how do we use social judgment to surface what your peers are interested in rather than what the crowd is interested in? This is the popularity risk problem of all all collaborative filtering systems. How do you find a community of practice to best at tagging and what have you? How can online communities support veterans going off topic together and also support newcomers seeking topical information and connections? Right? How do you let the old community drift from the initial goals of the community while still supporting newcomers who want to come in with and align themselves with the stated goals of the community? or could drive more meetings of minds across the world, particularly between otherwise insular groupings, as an example, US and Indian bloggers. We have all of these examples of relatively high cohesion among groups, and there's an intuition that there would be some value in creating lateral connections between those groups.
Can I just jump back
Yes.
to the previous one?
Oh, I'm sorry, sure.
We're doing some work, I'm not, as a woman called Natasha, on combining Mark's kind of stuff with information retrieval, so that it does make the record of what a community has talked about much easier to mine for newcomers.
So, the fact keeps itself alive. For a physical event to be shared virtually, what modifications in each world need to be made? This is the idea that's been floating around about SPIME and things that are represented both physically and virtually and act as kind of wormholes between the two. How do we effectively map social progress into social technologies? This is, again, we put the very large sort of framing questions at the end. What are the social impacts of having a voice and chat channel in the same environment? In fact, this is the question that made me want to not speak out loud, but what's the difference between hearing and reading versus just hearing? And Joey was talking about this some yesterday with voice over IP in Warcraft, the difference between just reading and talking in game environments. Can we create authoring tools that allow most users to create non-text media as easily in relative terms that we create writing and speaking, everything from graphics all the way up to virtual worlds and entire environments? What can we do? What can we do for the tool set to improve that creativity? And then some framing questions. How do we better design for the life cycle of individual and group social spaces? This gets somewhat to the concept of failure, and also there was a back-channel conversation about how long should these spaces exist. There's an engineering assumption often that things should be designed to last as long as possible, but in many cases you want spaces to come together and then die relatively quickly. How best to negotiate privacy versus public exposure for new social computing users, for people who don't have the expectation that privacy is over and we should all get over it, but who in fact want to preserve or maintain a certain amount of privacy. What can we do for them in those environments? How can we create a view of online spaces from the perspective of contemplative traditions? There wasn't the ... but presumably rather than purely participatory traditions. What happens with the ideas of place and space with social and mobile technologies? Plainly, Shelley alluded to this earlier, the sort of the return of the real, where our electronic networks are more and more accompanying rather than being an alternative to physical space.
I've got a source on that last.
Yes.
There's going to be a book coming out sometime early next year that'll pick up that issue.
Okay. By whom or author title?
By myself and Scott Campbell, by what's the press? I forget. It'll be coming out early next year.
Great. Is there a title?
No.
Okay. How can we move past the logic of the market as a touchstone for analysis, markets of reputation, social capital, and what are the implications of neoliberal ideology infusing research perspectives? There's a lot of work. There's actually an interesting Frank Fukuyama article, which I will find and put the link in, about trying to make social capital be something more than just a vague sense, particularly since social capital is obviously not terribly fungible, which is the condition of real capital. So in many ways, the sort of describing these things sets a certain research framework, which it would be helpful to understand, and that is that.
At this point, we're gonna switch into giving actual talks. But how many people need a bathroom?
No, we're going to switch into a bathroom. Yeah, we're going to switch into a bio break. So
bio break, and then we'll switch into the actual talks.
Right.
But we're just going to be a very quick switch.
Yeah, dense. Yes, I'm going to put the whole dump on the wiki, and we're going to take the back channel and syndicate it and figure out with Liz how do we put it up there, because obviously the cross fertilization is the point of that stuff. So back at 5 of 3.